Y'all, the Wallaru update has finally hit test realm, and today we're gonna be talking about how crazily they're changing the gear. It's looking like this world's gear is gonna be very, very different than what we're used to. And if you go to test realm and go to the test shop, the really unique items are actually not the hats, robes, and boots like you would think. These are just upgrades to what we now know as Aeon gear and Eternal gear. This is just the Novice templates that just have like slight increases in damage and resist and all of that. But everything else goes a little crazy. So I wanted to talk about what's so different about it, what's so unique, maybe what's even so exciting. So the side-by-side that you're seeing right now is the Aeon gear that you get at the end of Novice for fire and the equivalent set that you get at the end of Wallaru. And you'll notice a couple of key differences that I think are somewhat gigantic. For one, it looks like they're finally moving away from making secondary damage school specific. I know that doesn't seem like a big deal, but changing that 16 myth damage to 17% universal damage, that's a really, really big deal. Now, this is something that is also true for Athames, for Ring. And why is this such a big deal? Because normally what would happen is you could only dual school to schools that you actually had secondary damage to from your wands, Athames, and Ring. The way it worked in Novice was there was only so many secondary schools your Ring, Athame, and Wand could give damage to. So if you were a spirit school, you could only get secondary damage to an elemental school, meaning it was very, very hard, even if you put in, like, you know, max pins to something other than Storm right here, right? Because you wouldn't have access to wands on a life, for example, that gave anything but Storm, Ice, or Fire damage, you can never dual school into anything but Storm, Fire, and Ice. We went from 3 templates that allowed you to dual school into 3 schools. Now we're at all of them. Any school can dual school into any secondary school. Now, does this mean that school identity is now gone officially forever because any school can become any other school? I would say it's really hard to say that because there are still massive advantages to using spells from your own school, things like P-serve, things like critical. If you're a Storm, no other school has easy a job as you of actually getting all of the damage that you need to do max Storm damage. What I do think will happen though is in PvP and other forms of advanced content, you're gonna see some crazy strats, right? You might see Fire at running Storm damage because Storm is good against heals and heals are really OP in the meta. That's just not something that we had before. It makes every school way more viable in PvP and any form of advanced content. Also, unlike before, you don't need to craft 3 wands, 3 Athames, and 3 rings on every single wizard to be able to dual school into all of the directions you might want to dual school into. It lessens the grind significantly, and I think it's a good thing in the long term. Now, when we're getting into the very specifics, right, the wand is cool because it adds accuracy at the expense of secondary school crit, which is very, very useless, right? As a fire, I don't need myth crit, but 3 fire accuracy, that could go a long way for like making unique setups. You're basically given a bonus stat that you otherwise would have never had with basically the best wand from mainline questing. And the alternative setup, you lose your universal damage, which really lowers your overall damage from the wand, but you gain shads. I don't think that much damage loss is worth it, but I will say this, between the more defensive wand and the more offensive wand, one key difference is you have a tier slot on the offensive one and a square slot on the defensive one. Health has now been moved to square slots, and tier slots only give you mana. So tier slots for most purposes are kind of useless, and the health jewels are much, much higher than what we're used to. So if you have an easy way of making up the damage that you lose on this by some way, shape, or form, it's crazy to say, but because of the shad chance on the square slot, the defensive one is actually better than the offensive one. It can be, simply depending on how creative you are. The Athames are also super unique compared to what we're used to, right? In Novice, basically what we were considering pretty normal is either you get secondary school damage or you get some stat like healing if you're a healing school. But this gear flips the script. Now you can get secondary school damage on an Athame and outgoing, but the stat that you give up now is block. This is very interesting. I don't think block is a super important stat in PvE, so if you're trying to do like a healing setup on any school while also running some sort of secondary school damage, it's now much more possible than before. This could really lead to some cool setups. And in PvP, let's say that you were to give up like, I don't know, 70 block, it doesn't have to be the end of the world as long as your base block is still as high as you can make it, right? Like 500 something, you're good to go. The Athames offer a new trade-off that didn't exist before, also super unique to the Wallaru update. Keep in mind though, if you do go the outgoing route, you trade off a circle jewel for a square jewel. So yes, you can get more health, but it might come at the expense of pierce or damage that you can affix with circle jewels. The amulets are almost the same. There's an offensive version that gives like slightly less resist and a defensive version that gives slightly more resist. But the big difference is now they've moved triangle jewels over to amulets. So triangle jewels are still basically the same as what we've been used to. They added some P-serve jewels. They added a very small amount of shadow chance to the triangle jewels. People thought it was going to be a lot more. It's only 10. Really not great. And arch mastery. So they added all these new triangle jewels, but the real ones that most people are going to be using are pip chance and accuracy as usual. So now amulets, I guess, are going to be a source of that utility, like for, you know, if you need that accuracy or you need the pip chance. And depending on how offensive of an amulet you choose, you can either have an offensive option with the circle jewel or a defensive option with the square jewel. It's crazy to say this, but really the offensive versus defensive amulets are very, very similar. It's the jewel change that actually makes them feel like different pieces of gear. The rings are actually the one thing that seems to be very similar to Novus. Basically, you can either choose outgoing or secondary school damage. You can't do both like with the Athame. What I will say is very, very strange is that the rings that give outgoing also make you lose HP fully. So I don't really think these are worth it if you're a healing school, because you lose the HP stat. Kind of strange. And more importantly, you lose a circle jewel if you do the outgoing. So I feel like it's a pretty clear-cut choice. Most people are probably going to run the ring that gives a circle jewel and outgoing damage and HP. Like, I feel like it's just kind of a no-brainer. And as if all of this craziness wasn't enough, there's also decks that give circle jewels, meaning, yes, if you were to optimize, you can get 2 circle jewels on an Athame, you can get 1 circle jewel on an amulet, you can get a 4th circle jewel on a ring, and then you can get a 5th circle jewel on your deck. You might be thinking, what am I going to do with all that pierce? But guess what? They've also added damage circle jewels. So this is like the big thing that you can do with the circle jewels. If you have extra ones, you can affix more damage. Even in PvP, the stat cast for damage have risen so much that, yeah, you're probably going to want amulets to give circle jewels. You're probably going to want to use the decks to give circle jewels, because you need sources of damage to reach the stat caps on offensive schools or to maintain offense even on defensive schools. The decks all give pretty cool cards. They give like triple traps, so we haven't really seen in any other part of the game, which I think is really cool. Like this, like a myth deck giving this, pretty cool. But the big takeaway is that Wallaru gear seems to change what stats you give up compared to what we've been used to, right? Like you have like rings that give up HP, you have Athames that give up block, and depending on how defensive of a set you choose, you might give up circle jewels for square jewels or the other way around. And while that adds a lot of choice, you don't need to make a bunch of templates anymore, because so many things now give universal damage. The only reason to make multiple templates is if you're trying to dual school into many different directions. That is a lot easier to do, and I think that's one of the best parts of this update when it comes to gear. I hope I did a good job breaking down specifically how they're changing gear. I will be making tons of videos. If you guys are confused about the jewels, that will be a video. The hats, robes, and boots, when they update all the templates in a test realm, that'll be a video. There'll be plenty more videos, so make sure you drop a sub with noties on. I just wanted to cover what was new in test realm today, which seems to be the wands, Athames, rings, decks, and amulets. Let me know what you guys think about this specific, these specific gear changes. They're kind of nuts. I look forward to reading y'all's opinions. Drop a like if you enjoyed, leave a sub if you're new, and if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Thank you for all the support on the content, y'all. Check out all of the Wallaru content. Stay awesome. See y'all soon. And yeah.